Good afternoon and welcome to the March 9, 2022 City Council work session. Thank you for joining us in this remote meeting format we're using as our state and community continue to recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. We're almost there. This format enables the City Council to meet and take care of business while keeping everyone safe. For work sessions like this one, where there is no opportunity for public comment, those wishing to access the meeting can do so by watching the live stream available on our website, the broadcast on Comcast Channel 21, or by calling into one of the phone numbers listed for this meeting on the public webcast and meeting materials web page. And thank you again for joining us. And with that, I am going to turn it right over to the city manager to introduce our first topic.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. We have two pretty important topics this afternoon. The first one being the Riverfront Muppy application. So I'm going to turn it right over to Will so we have as much time as possible for you to ask questions.
Hello, good afternoon, Mayor and City Council. We're back to talk with you again about 3 multi-unit property tax exemption applications. I'm Will Dowdy, Community Development Director, and with me again are Dylan Huber-Heidorn and Amanda D'Souza. After I introduce the topic, Dylan's going to take you through a summarized checklist of the Muppy program criteria and how these applications have met each one. Then Amanda will walk through the monitoring process for approved Muppy projects, including the safeguards that Council added to the program in 2015. As we began putting this presentation together, I was struck by the fact that we're at a juncture of 2 arcs, each many years in the making. First, the applications before you today are Muppy applications, which are part of a program that's been active in Eugene for years. The program exists to help get more housing downtown and with the patience of a public agency to build up the tax base for future generations. As you well know, Council made major revisions to the program in 2015, putting more specificity on the public benefits and introducing a stronger clawback mechanism so that what you see in the application is what you get. Second, the applications before you today are part of the Downtown Riverfront project, another project that's been in the making for decades. With the goal of restoring this brownfield site where downtown meets the river, we've worked carefully to master plan this site, and we've selected carefully a partner to do that development work. And they have shown equally great care in the design they have applied. Recognizing a number of challenges inherent in this project, including the complications of redeveloping a brownfield, the high quality, durable character needed for the buildings, the need to develop in a downtown style with buildings that fill each site and don't leave a lot of room around the edges, the need for embedded parking, the prevailing wages for construction, the large quantity of units that need to be developed in quick succession, the requirement to purchase land at market rate. Recognizing all these challenges, the Atkins Dame team identified early on that they would be pursuing Muppy applications for every residential project. And it is included as a developer condition for closing in the deal points that you approved as the agency board in 2018. So whether you've been following the progress of the downtown riverfront or the broader story of housing downtown, these applications mark a milestone moment. With that as a context, I'll pass it on to Dylan to review the applications themselves.
For the benefit of anyone who's tuning into this topic for the first time, Muppy, or the multi-unit property tax exemption, is an incentive program to encourage high quality multi-unit housing downtown. We went into detail about the program at the last work session, so I'll keep this brief. City Council is obligated to take action on Muppy applications within 180 days, which would fall on April 13th for the first of these 3 proposals. As a refresher, 3 Muppy applications were made for the Eugene downtown riverfront area. All 3 of the projects would be 4-story residential developments with no commercial space. Parcel 3BC would be 130 units, Parcel 7 would be 95 units, and Parcel 9 would be 156 units. Together, the projects try to bring downtown Eugene to the riverfront using a unified aesthetic that relies on high quality materials, designs that engage with the public realm, and trying to conceal parking wherever possible. What we didn't have for you last time is the formal conclusions and recommendation of the Muppy review panel. The 10-member panel scrutinized these applications during 3 meetings over the past few months. Information about the panel itself is in attachment C of your packet. To summarize, the panel concluded that the applications meet each of the Muppy criteria. They recommend approval of 10-year Muppy exemptions for all 3 proposals, and the details are in attachment H. Taking the review panel's recommendations into account, the city manager also recommends approval of 10-year tax exemptions for all 3 of the proposed projects. We reviewed the Muppy approval criteria in more detail during the February 22nd work session, along with the information in the applications that try to address them. Today, I just want to briefly summarize the review panel's conclusions regarding their compliance with those criteria. So the panel determined that the number of units satisfies the Muppy criteria and the targets set in the DDA. The proposed green building features meet the Muppy standards via the BPS energy use pathway. The provided local economic impact plans meet the required criteria for hiring local contractors and other requirements. Regarding the moderate income housing contribution, the developer has opted to pay 10% of the total exemption amount as a moderate income housing fee. That fee, approximately $2 million for these 3 projects, will be used to support moderate income housing, but it will not be part of the Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It's a separate pool of money. Per the review by the urban design staff and others, the building and site designs satisfy the criteria for design and compatibility, and the projects would not negatively impact sensitive historic resources or existing housing. The final public benefit criterion is project financial need. The purpose of the criteria is to determine that the project would not be financially feasible without the Muppy. As we described at the February work session, the applicant's pro forma analyses were reviewed by an independent financial consultant who concluded that a 10-year exemption would make all the difference for the financial feasibility of these 3 projects. If all 3 projects were awarded 10-year exemptions, the total amount of foregone property tax would be roughly $20.7 million. That would be over years 1 through 10, compared to a scenario where the exact same projects are built, but they were paying full property taxes. So now I'll pass things off to Amanda to discuss the questions that you asked about compliance with Muppy criteria over time.
So at the last work session, there were questions about how projects are monitored after a Muppy is approved. So I'll briefly go through what compliance looks like. The first set of items occur before construction. The city's equity and contracting staff meets with the developer and their general contractor to discuss opportunities and resources to reach out to minority-owned, women-owned, and disadvantaged businesses. The developer meets with the neighborhood once more to solicit feedback on the updated design. Once they submit for building permits, the city sends the designs to the neighborhood for a 3rd and final opportunity to comment. Also, when they submit for building permits, they'll also submit an energy model, which staff reviews to ensure, and the staff would review the project to ensure that it matches the project that is described in the Muppy resolution, which includes another review of the design. During construction, the applicant submits information on all subcontractors working on the project and collects notarized affidavits that confirm they're in compliance with tax and wage laws. They also collect zip code or home city information on all labor workers on the project. After construction, they'll fulfill the green building requirements for their chosen pathway. All of the recent Muppy projects have chosen the building and permit services pathway, which requires the submission of a commissioning report showing that the building was built according to the energy model they submitted. They also submit energy usage data annually over the 10 years. Once the exemption starts, they'll either pay their moderate income housing fee or provide the moderate income housing units. All of these items are monitored by the Muppy review panel, who reviews projects during and after construction and reviews ongoing compliance at their annual review meeting. They prepare reports to the city manager, which we also include in council packet. If a project were to be non-compliant with any of those Muppy requirements, council would determine next steps, which could include a possible clawback through either an administrative penalty or Muppy termination. I'll now pass it back to Will to finish off the presentation.
We talked about the connection to the housing implementation pipeline a little bit at the last meeting, and I wanted to repeat a little bit of that today. The buildings in these Muppy applications would provide 381 market rate housing units. In addition to the units that they propose to build, there's also the benefit that comes from the moderate income housing contribution. So what does this contribution do? What does it look like? We have a good example. A couple years back, Gordon Lofts received a Muppy, and we got about $400,000 from that project. We combined that money with federal CDBG funds and local urban renewal funds for the 1059 Willamette project. The combined funds, about $1.5 million, is eliciting over $30 million of private funds to create 129 mixed income units downtown. So here, with about $2 million for moderate income housing, we could expect to see another project on the same scale as 1059 Willamette, or we could combine these funds with other resources, as we did with that project, and create multiple projects with hundreds of units all told. At the last work session, you had a number of good questions and comments. What we weren't able to respond to at that time, we've tried to answer in the AIS and at the attachments, including Councilor Keating's questions about the pet-friendly amenities that will be included in the new buildings. You've heard from Dylan about the recommendation from the panel, and then the recommendation from the city manager that builds upon that, taking into account the fact that the program has met all the criteria, or the applications have met all the criteria in the program. We're happy to answer any further questions today. And if you're ready to take action, there's a recommended motion in the AIS. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It is, I really appreciate this opportunity and the AIS for council to come back and have their questions answered from the last work session. A very, very helpful process, and I appreciate that. And it looks like we have a couple of hands raised. So I'll turn it over to Claire and then Emily.
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks, staff, for taking us back through that very quickly. And I do feel that our first work session on this, answered a lot of my questions. So I don't have questions about the Muppy applications. And I did want to say one thing that I might not have said at the prior work session is that I really did appreciate the independent review of the pro forma. That was really provided a lot of reassurance. To have that comparison between what the assumptions were of the applicant and what the assumptions were of independent analysis. And that just gave a deeper level of understanding of the dynamics in play. So if we can do that, I know that's not a requirement of Muppy, at least I don't think so, but it was really helpful. My question actually is about the thing about the housing contribution not going into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and I feel like I missed a step somewhere. Was there a policy decision made that this Muppy contribution would go to moderate income housing? And if so, when did that happen? Because I missed it.
I can speak to that. The program, as it was set up by when it was redone in 2015, it specified that the funds that are paid in lieu of providing units would go towards moderate income housing, and that's what's specifically written into the program at that time. And so then our process, the process that we used with the Gordon Lofts example, was to bring those funds as part of a proposed funding package for another decision. So it went straight to a council decision about the use of those funds.
Yeah, okay. I totally misremembered that detail. So thank you very much. That's it. Thanks.
Hey, Emily and then Mike.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. When I ran for council, I had a lot of positions that I've held to, and I said that if I changed my mind, I would say so and why. When I ran for council the first time, I promised not to vote for Muppy's, and I haven't. I didn't think that Muppy was evil. I just thought it had been misused, and with the disastrous capstone project, it really was upsetting to people, and I didn't feel that it was the right path. Since then, in the last 5 years, we've approved a couple Muppy's, and I'm really excited to see that the $400,000 from the Gordon Lofts has enabled us to go forward with 1059 right now. This one doesn't give us money until the 3rd year through the 10th, which I don't like as much, but it's certainly helping. And the one on Ferry Street has affordable units. So having the experience of watching these Muppy's go through and being beneficial, I think that the time is right for projects that meet the requirements, that they're okay. I really appreciate the revisions and that we are reaching out to local people and minorities for labor and materials. that there's more green building and more accountability. The independent review for whether or not it actually makes the building feasible instead of not feasible is critical. And most important to me is that it cannot be used for student housing. I would like to see further revisions, that it would be easier and not take so much time for the applicants. And I'd really like to be at only 5 years. In principle, I'm against tax exemptions, but we use them. I've always voted for the low income tax exemptions, so I have a little precedent there. I'd rather see the whole riverfront stay as public land, as I've said before, but we're in desperate need of more housing of all sorts. I think this will be a very desirable neighborhood, and it has, although it will certainly, I think, over time be a richer neighborhood because it's on the river. It does take into account accessibility for the general public also. So I'm changing my position for this project, and I'm looking forward to the results. And I know people who don't want this will be very enthusiastic in their disapproval and will let me know. So if any of you are happy, I'd like to know that too. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike, and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, I appreciate your comment about the two overarching long time efforts here. And I want to just stop for a second, and because this is near the culmination of all of this. So I just want to say good job to staff and all of those who've been involved to this point. I mean, I remember back from the master planning process where nobody objected to all of the pieces and the rewrite of Muppy and all of the pieces that have come together to help this be a real gem on the banks of our river when we get done. So good job to everybody who's worked so hard for so long. I just wanted to, a couple of things popped into my head that I had questions about. I don't know if you'll have specific dollar type answers. Maybe you can guess in broad generalities here, close. My recollection is that this particular work is now the words are when the prevailing wage, that's what I'm looking for. Sorry about that, guys. This is a prevailing wage job. Do I have that correct? And that determination doesn't have anything to do with Muppy per se. That's a state determination that was made previously.
Correct.
But I do want to ask the question, the differential in percentages, in as close a guess as you would feel comfortable with, if this was a market rate job, what amount of money more are we paying for it to be a prevailing wage job? 10% more, 20% more? What, do you have a thought on that?
I think it's in the 5 to 10% increase range. And Denny, you may have a more recent number than I do if you want to add in.
Yeah, and it depends on the type of construction. So housing is different than a commercial building, which is different than an industrial building, et cetera. So sure. For this type of building that's housing, mostly housing for these types of buildings, I think Will's correct. It's probably something in the 5 to 10% range. That's correct.
And all three combined are like 150 million. Don't I remember that right? So we're, 75 to, I got to do that math again here, just properly here. 7.5 to 15 million in differential for the wages that people building it will get paid more.
Correct.
And one can make the argument then that long-term our tax base will be incredibly stronger after this Muppy period is done, but the local people doing the work are going to get paid between 7.5 million and 15 million more. This is near to, at least if you take the top end of that scale, what the tax exemption is. And that's not even talking about design criteria or enhanced design criteria for Muppy. So you could say, I think reasonably, that someone receiving Muppy makes sure that the folks working locally on the project get paid a better wage, and that the end product itself is a better looking project for the community. And I appreciate that. Thanks.
Thank you. Alan and then Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. You know, back in 2015, we all worked very hard on Muppy reform, and we worked particularly hard. I worked on making sure that we get tangible, real public benefits from the tax credits, that we're just not giving away money, we're actually getting something back for it. And things that I worked hard for were having the buildings be 10% above energy code, so they're more energy efficient and does that. That they be EV ready for charging stations, because it's up to 6 times more expensive to retrofit for EV charging stations than putting them in now. It's a good question if that should be revisited, and if that's the standard's too low, or that we should have that be more stringent, especially since where we're going with EVs. And then there was also the other added public benefit of the 10% of the tax credit value going to moderate housing, or the 30% workforce housing. We let the developer decide. Almost all of them have chose to do the fee, which is I was a proponent of. George Brown was a proponent of the 30% workforce housing. Still a good question whether or not that's too low and paid for over time, too long of a period to pay for it over time. So that could be a conversation about Muppy reform part 2. But this isn't Muppy's not an affordable housing program. It's that's why we have this provision in there to actually bolster that by making the fee. And then then we also put in minority and women-owned businesses, 50% local labor, and abiding by all the wage laws, prevailing wage and other laws. And those didn't go far enough from my perspective, but they're good adds to it so that we can see public benefit. And then finally, the transparency and the financial need of Muppy for the project to go forward was hard to tell before. So we added in this independent review. And I pushed really hard for an independent evaluation so we could have a more objective data than just what we heard from the developers. And so I've not voted for a Muppy in the past since we've done reform, especially since the student housing around the university. There were 2 that were 2 blocks away. One got a Muppy, one didn't. They're almost identical. You kind of wonder, did they need it or not? So that's a different question. I'm satisfied that there is public benefit here, and that the independent financial analysis showed that it was very credible, I thought. It showed that there's insufficient rate of return without the Muppy for this project to move forward. So I'm satisfied with that. I have 2 questions. One around, I asked about setback requirements in the last meeting, if you could get to that, and about bike parking in the right of way instead of on the project's site. If you could answer those 2 questions.
Sure, I could speak to that. What we determined after you asked the question about the setbacks is that the setback changes that were made through council's recent work on setbacks applies to the C2 and C3 zones. This is a special zone, and so specifically that section of code doesn't apply to this section. However, I think that it's fair to say that a lot of the same intent that went into council's recent work around setbacks was also taken into account recently through the work that was done on crafting this code, because the code in this area is very intentionally written to provide a strong sidewalk experience and recognizing the relationship of the buildings to the streets. So although the specific provisions don't apply, I think that the intent is very consistent, and that the result will be that you'll get the same positive results one way or the other.
Yeah, I just don't want a replication of the capstone build out, and I'm satisfied that won't occur here. Bike parking in the right of way.
Again, with bike parking in the right of way, this is something we continue to work on with our transportation planning team of the right location of bike parking and creating bike parking as a community benefit. So what we're going to see through these buildings, they're going to meet code. They're going to do better than providing what code provides. That's their standard approach to working with bicyclists and recognizing the really incredible location for this housing related to biking. And we're going to be working with them on the right of way to make sure that people who live there and people who visit and people who are coming to the park, everyone has sufficient bike parking.
Thank you. I think I'm over time. I need another round, Mayor.
Okay. Greg and then Jennifer.
Now I'm unmuted. Alan just mentioned this in his comments, and I'd like to just follow up a little bit on that. How are we, as we're going through the revised criteria that we put in place for Muppy around minority and women owned businesses and contractors, how are we holding the developer accountable for those requirements or those aspirational goals that we have? We're not talking about quotas. We're talking about aspirational goals around participation of subcontractors. Particularly, my assumption is, and I can't recall where I saw it at, that this will be a GMCG project. Is that correct, Will? Okay. And so my concern is that we don't have token participation of minority and women contractors, but real genuine participation, including verification that the firms that are being used are not being fronted by people who have the right look, but actually firms that are owned, operated, and employ women and people of color on these jobs.
So there's a couple of different parts to our approach on this. One of the challenges that we have as we work through the rules, and this is what's reflected in the rules, is that we can't require who they work with and who they don't work with. And so we focus on setting the table for the best outcome rather than mandating something that we can't enforce. And that's an important understanding when it comes to workforce and how we've approached it, and why the workforce compliance is a little different than some of the other compliance pieces, where it's a very clear answer about whether they've been compliant with the program or not. So what we have done through the program is we have said, we want to see a plan. We want to see a plan of action, and we want documentation on what has happened and how well you have achieved that plan or not. And we can't penalize them for failing to follow through on some of the specifics of the plan. They are required to meet with our purchasing staff, who are the best around that I know of in coming up with a diverse sourcing of companies. But in terms of exactly how they implement the plan, that's not something that we can mandate. So what we are doing as we are working through this program is identifying what companies and what developers have done through the Muppy program. And that's something that gets reviewed in the annual review and the meetings that we have with our Muppy panel. And then that's part of how we evaluate the program as we get farther along. And we have the opportunity to say, to identify, here are the steps that they took on the front end, and here was what the follow through looked like. And then we can use that as part of the criteria for evaluating the future of the program.
Can we ask the developer for a history, or at least some tangible examples of projects they have worked on in the past in which they have been inclusive of women and minority contractors?
We can ask them for that. And I'll say one other piece connected with that. Part of the reason why that we have a emphasis also on local labor is the recognition that it's about building up the community and understanding the local values and being more accountable locally. And so that contributes to other intents around hiring minority women and emerging small businesses.
I just want to be sure that we don't end up in a situation where which the particular project will remain nameless. It was a private project that utilized workers from outside of the community, and we're not paying prevailing wage. So I just want to make sure that we are using local workers. We're using local firms as much as we possibly can, and that this project will recycle money back into our community multiple times over, and not have it just float out of here without it reinvesting and continuing to reinvest in our local economy.
If I could jump in briefly, Councillor, I will point out the review panel requested that this topic of shoring up the requirements of the local economic impact plans, they requested that on their plate for their annual review meeting later this year. They have at least one strong voice to really dive into this.
Okay.
Thank you. Jennifer and Randy next.
Thanks. Actually, I was going to ask essentially what Councillor Evans had already asked. I do appreciate that the section in the AIS on local economic impact, it looks to me from my memory that you guys added some more details in here, which was helpful. I appreciated that. And I think along with what Greg is saying is, I understand the limitations of that we can't require certain things, but getting good data back on how their plans, whether they were successful or weren't successful, I think would be really valuable for us when we're trying to determine whether these requirements are doing what we want them to do. And do we need to make adjustments? Because if they're very well intentioned, but they're just not getting us the results we need, then that's something we seriously need to take a look at. And I'm really glad that the committee is also interested in that. So thanks, Dylan, for sharing that. That's very reassuring. And everything else I had is covered, so thank you.
Okay, Randy.
Thank you, Mayor. And I am satisfied with the process. My questions were answered even before today. I do think the questions that came up today, though, were good ones. My understanding is this project probably would not proceed without help from a Muppy. I think Muppy is an important tool in our development portfolio, but at the same time, I do not think it should ever be an automatic rubber stamp. I think each project needs to be vetted case by case, which that's what I believe we are doing. But I didn't want to just sit here and be silent and not speak in support of this, in support of moving our downtown to the river, which this helps us do, and in support of creating much needed housing. So thank you very much. I look forward to the vote.
Thank you. Alan, did you need one more round? Go for it.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. So what I like about this project is it's a $160 million investment in the downtown area. We give a net of 18.6 million to make it happen. And we get 381 new housing units in that area. So, so we're basically creating a new neighborhood. And, giving away 18.6 million, we need to get something back, but we also need to make it profitable for the developers to do it. Understand that. The public benefits we get in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of having the buildings be EV ready, the 10% fee for housing, which probably takes too long for us to get it the way we structured it. And the local labor law, using local labor, they say that 55% is going to be local labor, and then attesting to minority and women-owned businesses and prevailing wage laws. I don't think we went far enough when we did reform. This is merely a reporting requirement. There's no provision that allows us to claw back any of the tax credit should they not perform to what they said they were going to do, which I think was an error on our part. But I also like that it's not student housing. We've got a lot of that. So, and I'm satisfied with the independent financial need analysis showing that this project probably wouldn't be built because the rate of return is not sufficient to attract capital and loans to be able to do it. So with that, overall, I can support this project. It'll be the first Muppy I've supported since reform. But future Muppy projects, as Emily said, are going to be on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you. Greg, another round.
Yeah, this isn't directly to the subject at hand right now, but I do want to bring this up again because I brought this up about 7 or 8 years ago as far as Muppy is concerned. I do think we need to revisit phasing Muppties and not just having a 10-year tax exemption. I think that we need to have 5-year and 7-year tax exemptions. And I think that we need to do that in the best interest of the basic public good. If we have a tiered Muppy program, I think that would be attractive to developers as well as to, larger developers with bigger projects. I'm looking at smaller projects, more compact projects that Muppy really needs to have, I think, more rigor in that particular area. And so at some point, I think that we need to have a work session on phasing Muppy and being able to have shorter periods of tax exemptions, and that we build criteria in that would encourage people to use shorter length Muppys.
Okay, thank you. And Alan, the third round, and then we're done.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar to Greg, but I was going to be a little bit more expansive. I think what we're hearing is that we really should take a look back at Muppy and see and evaluate how well the reforms worked and see where we might need to make adjustments and or enhancements to it. It's been a while. It's been 7 years since we did that, went into place. So I think the world's changed a lot in a lot of ways. So I think putting on the schedule a Muppy Reform 2 work session where we evaluate and think about what we want to change would be a real valuable use of council time. And I look forward to it.
Yeah, thank you all. This has come up each time the Muppy comes up for a vote. We have this conversation about whether we want to take the time to revisit the Muppy. So I do think that needs to be on the agenda. And you have depending on what happens today, but you've already approved recently the two Muppys in the last couple of years. And so there's some new data about how that's worked. So I think that's a good request. All right, with that, I'm going to turn it over to Councilor Sarette to put the first of the 3 motions on the table.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I was going to say, am I the only one who doesn't remember that 2 weeks ago we had that same round of dialogue about looking at the Muppy? So the AIS has 3 motions and then a single vote as the structure. Is that how I'm to proceed, City Attorney? Or a vote after each motion?
It would be a vote after each motion.
Okay. Move to adopt a resolution approving a multi-unit property tax exemption for residential property located on Lot 2 and Lot 3 of the town-run Plat in Eugene, Oregon, Assessor's Map 17-03-32-22, tax lots 1800 and 1900. Applicant Eugene Riverfront District LLC, approving a multi-unit property tax exemption for parcel 3BC.
We'll need a second, because Matt is not.
Yeah, our council vice president is absent.
Second. And well
Thank
done.
you.
I failed to read it in the all caps that.
Yeah. All right, thank you. All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that passes 7-0. All right, Claire, second one.
Okay. Move to adopt a resolution approving a multi-unit property tax exemption for residential property located on lot 9 of the town-run Plat in Eugene, Oregon. Assessors map 17-03-32, excuse me, -22, tax lot 2500, applicant Eugene Riverfront District LLC, approving a multi-unit property tax exemption for parcel 7.
Second. And I think you nailed the all caps that time, Claire.
There you go. All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that passes 7-0. Thank you. And finally, the third one.
Move to adopt a resolution approving a multi-unit property tax exemption for residential property located on lot 12 of the town-run Plat in Eugene, Oregon. Assessors map 17-03-3222, tax lot 02800, applicant Riverfront District LLC, approving a multi-unit property tax exemption for parcel 9.
Second.
All in favor, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and that passes 7-0. So thank you very much. Congratulations. It's very exciting to be moving forward on this project. It really meets so many of our city's top priority goals and really hits it on all measures. And so thank you all. Thank you, Will, for your presentation, and Denny and Dylan. So terrific. And with that, we can happily move on to the next topic. Work session on middle housing code, and I'll turn that over to the manager.
Thank you, Mayor. As you know, you guys are getting a lot of communications about this project. It's been going on for a while, and I expect that's going to continue. So we were hoping to be able to have a brief work session with you today to kind of just outline where we're heading. We'll be back again when you get back from break with more work sessions and public hearings and actions. So I actually think that I'm turning it over to Terry Harding, but I could be wrong.
Indeed. Thank you,
Thanks.
Sarah. I'll share my screen here. Somebody tell me if I'm showing you my notes when I'm not supposed to be, please.
It looks perfect.
All right, thank you. So good afternoon. I'm Terry Harding, and it just advanced without me doing anything. Let's go back. I'm still Terry Harding. I'm principal planner with the Community Planning and Design team, and we're here today to talk to you about the Middle Housing Code amendments recommended by the Eugene Planning Commission to implement House Bill 2001. Today, we'll talk about what middle housing is and the requirements of the House Bill, where we are in the process, and what's in the Planning Commission recommendation, and what's next for the City Council process. First, what's middle housing, or missing middle housing? Before single-family zoning, like Eugene's R1 zone, was expanded after World War II across the country, American neighborhoods contained a mix of single houses and other types of housing that fit different household compositions and budget needs. The term missing middle housing was coined by Daniel Paralek of Optica's Design to describe housing that falls between a single detached unit and an apartment building. The top 3 pictures on this slide from left to right are Eugene examples of middle housing: a fourplex, a duplex, and townhomes. Middle housing can be found in many older neighborhoods and historic districts, as well as in newer mixed housing neighborhoods. But until House Bill 2001, new middle housing was difficult to build in large parts of the city only allowed in certain places, often requiring special permits, public hearings, and discretionary approval processes. Once, and it did it again. Sorry about that. Once cities implement the bill, middle housing will be allowed by right in most large city neighborhoods. House Bill 2001 passed in 2019 with the goal of increasing housing supply and choice in cities around the state of Oregon. So in our state, middle housing is defined as duplexes, which are 2 units, triplexes, which are 3, fourplexes, which are 4, cottage clusters, which are small homes grouped around open space, and townhomes, which are attached homes on separate lots. By June 30th of this year, cities with over 25,000 residents must update their zoning to allow a duplex on each lot where a single family dwelling is allowed, and the other middle housing types must have this on automatic advance. This is frustrating. The other middle housing types in residential zones based on the size of the lot. The state led the process of rulemaking to guide cities in how to implement the bill, with a focus on equity. They established a rules advisory committee, which was composed of builders, city representatives, advocates for housing, and stakeholders. And our own Chris Pryor, former city councilor, was on that committee. And a technical advisory committee made up of experts in building and users of the code, as well as stakeholder groups. The Land Conservation and Development Commission adopted the rules in 2020 after 18 months of work at the state level. In Eugene, we have 2 basic options for moving forward and adopting a code. First, we could use the state's model code, or we could develop a local code that fits into our existing code structure and meets the state's minimum standards. The Eugene Planning Commission's recommendation is based on the minimum standards. Where it differs, it's to incentivize smaller units, flexibility, lower cost and affordable housing, and housing near transit. Our local Eugene project goals for middle housing are to, number 1, comply with the House bill and survive appeals so that we have implementation final at the local level. Secondly, to enable housing availability and diversity of type. And thirdly, to further ongoing housing affordability and equity, which are very important elements of the housing implementation pipeline that was referred to in your latest presentation. Eugene's process included a robust public outreach period, a technical analysis phase, and a lengthy planning commission process. Public outreach effort included all of the typical engagement strategies, such as a community-wide survey, roundtables with boards and commissions and local partners, and a robust project website. And we added a few new tools. We pulled together 79 community members for roundtable and focus group discussions, piloted a lottery-selected panel with Healthy Democracy, partnered with 7 equity-focused organizations, and posted content and interacted with interested people on 3 social media platforms. It's the most robust and equitable engagement effort we've ever done in planning, and it was all done online due to the pandemic. For the technical analysis phase, we worked with economic consultants doing feasibility analysis of the housing market in Eugene. We developed code concepts and drawings, wrote code, did review cycles with that team, and went through legal review with our in-house attorneys. Planning commission process involved tailoring the code to our local needs. Planning commission met 20 times for 2 to 3 hours per meeting, deliberated carefully, and crafted a recommendation to you to approve a set of code amendments to implement the House bill and meet other project goals. Strong themes emerged from the outreach done with different groups and the general public. The 4 themes include equity and inclusion, encouraging and incentivizing middle housing across the community, incentivizing flexibility, small homes, housing near transit, and affordable and lower cost housing. And lastly, pursuing financial incentives and programs beyond the code, such as through the HIP. Now, after those 18 months of state rulemaking and 18 months of local outreach and analysis, the Planning Commission recommendation is coming to you for your consideration. The recommendation is based on the state's minimum standards and is customized for local needs in response to outreach results and economic feasibility analysis. So let's take a peek inside the guide to the recommendation, which was the only attachment to your AIS. Inside the guide, there are a series of code summary tables. And on this slide are two examples of how the minimum standards compare to the model code and the Eugene Planning Commission recommendation. So in the left-hand column, there are the minimum standards. In the center column, we have the model code. And in the right-hand column, we have the Planning Commission recommendation with a color-coded key for whether it implements the code at the allow level or does more to encourage and incentivize middle housing. The first example is the minimum lot size standard for a fourplex. And you can see there are differences. The minimum standard says that a lot has to be 7,000 square feet to have a fourplex. The model code says it has to be 4,500 square feet, and the Planning Commission says the same. The other example for street frontage for a fourplex lot is the same across all three categories. So it's 50 feet for an interior and corner lot and 35 feet for a curved lot or cul-de-sac bulb lot. And the fact that it is the same across minimum, model, and recommendation means that that's coded as an allow option. I hope that makes sense. A little bit more here about where the Planning Commission's recommendations fall. Much of the recommendation, as I mentioned, goes with the minimum standards. If you flip through the guide and count them up, there are 30 standards that go with the allow option, including the ones shown on this screen. There are 17 standards that fall into the category of encouraging and 9 that do incentivizing. Although the code can't require new middle housing units to be affordable due to state law, it can encourage smaller units and more housing by reducing lot size, lot width, increasing building height by 5 feet over what's allowed for single detached units, and increasing lot coverage over what is allowed for single detached units. Incentives can offer flexibility by allowing units to be detached so that existing homes are kept while new units are added. And lots can be even smaller and parking reduced even more if the units are small, near transit, or offered to income qualified residents. I'll just note that these incentives are not in the model code or the minimum standards, but they are part of the recommendation to respond to local needs. This graphic is from the Lane County Affordable Housing Action Plan from 2020, and it shows income ranges in our county. I'd like to point out the red arrow in the upper right hand of the slide. This shows that new single family detached housing is being delivered to our housing market at over 200% of area median income. We all have seen that. Housing prices are very high for new construction. So how can middle housing help? New middle housing was looked at by our economic consultants at Echo Northwest, and they estimate that new middle housing can be delivered at 71 to 94% of area median income, which is the narrower of the two red boxes on this chart. In addition, local project data shows that projects can be delivered down to 60% AMI in our local community already. An example would be the C Street Co-op project in Springfield. So what's next? We are at the beginning of the council process for middle housing. The team has been doing outreach and communications. We've been holding information sessions and recording those and putting them on our website. We are having work sessions with you, including another one after your break. And as Sarah mentioned, you are receiving a lot of written testimony about this project. That can continue up to and after the council public hearing, which is scheduled for April 18th. Just a second. And then following your public hearing, you have potential action scheduled for May. The code must be in effect prior to June 30th, 2022, or the state's model code will directly apply in Eugene. And that's the end of my presentation. I look forward to your questions. And I will mention that 2 of our planning commissioners are here with me, as well as staff from planning and city attorney's office. Sorry, I'm trying to get my mouse over here.
Thank you very much, Terry, for that summation. Actually, was very succinct and a very helpful way of being sort of the high points of a lot of what council has been hearing, I think, in public comments. So really appreciate the way you distilled that down. And it's like Emily has a question. So Emily, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you for the succinct wrap up of what everybody's been working on for 18 months. A few things I'd like to point out. It has to be done by June 30th, but that's not when we have to do it. It has to be in effect by June 30th, which according to our code has to be signed 30 days before. So this is a false deadline that it's June 30th. It's actually the end of May, which is 10 weeks away. From my analysis, it looks to me that the Planning Commission's guide and suggestions is based on the model code, not the minimum code, since the model codes in the charts we got are all included in the Planning Commission. I would like to see us start with the minimum code. I would like to see a chart that shows us minimum code, model code, Planning Commission, and the code suggestions brought up by Bill Northrup, which also would like to ask to have DLCD, see if those would be approvable. I really would like to see that. I wonder if there's any statistical analysis of all the public outreach. I'm impressed by how much we did, and yet I hear quite often that many people are oblivious to this. I believe that if we go forward full on with all of these recommendations, people are going to be shocked and the pushback will be enormous. So I just wonder how much of the general public has really been informed and their responses have been paid attention to, because I think all of the special groups are special and they represent different parts, but maybe not everybody. Some questions. Why the extra 5 feet? What does that give you? What's a half story? Does that have more bedrooms in it? Why? Why more? I don't see any benefit. What I do know is that if you have taller ceilings, it makes a small room look bigger and you can charge more money for it. So to me, the extra 5 feet is a way to get the buildings to cost more, thereby displacing more people who can't afford them. I just really think that the Planning Commission has gotten too excited and gone full out to everything we could do with this. The state has given us some really big changes that we have to implement. I think it would be wise to start with those. Come back in a year, really push the education and see how it's working. I'm not against the individual ideas, not all of them, some I'm against. I think they're good ideas, but I don't think we need to start there. I think we need to start at the basis, at the minimum, and then see where Eugene wants to go. Thank you.
Terry, did you want to respond to any of those questions before?
Maybe a quick comment on the building height, just because you had a question about why to do that. And the answer is that it was recommended as one of the places where our consultants told us we could use a land use standard, a tool to allow more housing, more physical square feet of housing for people to make use of.
I don't understand how greater height makes more housing.
I can provide a little bit of an explanation and I'll keep it relatively brief, but the 30-foot height limit that currently exists in most zones for at least, let's talk about R1 residential or low density zone. When you're constructing a building, in between the foundation, the space in between floors, a 30-foot structure or 30-foot height limit generally will limit a structure or make it very difficult to actually develop to full 3 stories. So by adding that extra 3 feet, it does provide a level of flexibility in design that you can actually accommodate a 3-story structure without having flat roofs or other similar features of that nature.
Okay, thank you. Randy and then Alan.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Terry, for the presentation. Thank you, Planning Commission, for the hard work you've put into this. I know this is not an easy issue. Gauging by the responses we've received this past period of time, it's emotional on both sides of the issue. And there's also a lot of confusion and misunderstandings out there that's apparent through some of the communications I've read. One question I do have that I still am trying to reconcile is, how does House Bill 2003 play into House Bill 2001? You know, I believe we're calling that the housing pipeline bill. It almost seems like a chicken and egg discussion for me, and I'm trying to understand that. So I don't know if you have a succinct explanation that would help me, but I think also be good for the public that may be listening.
I'll give it a shot, but I saw Lauren turned her camera on. So House Bill 2003 refers to the production of housing and a focus on getting more affordable housing out of the ground. The city does have deadlines associated with that work, and it is on a later timeline for implementation than House Bill 2001. Locally, as you mentioned, we have the housing implementation pipeline, and it covers a broad range of things, not just what's required in House Bill 2003. So they're not the same thing. I wanted to point that out.
Oh, okay.
Anything to add, Lauren? No.
Okay, thank you. I always try to look for the middle ground when possible on these things. I'm not sure it exists here, although I do like the idea of stepping in at the shallow end and walking towards the deep end rather than just diving headfirst into the deep end. But I'm not sure that's going to happen in this case. It just seems like there's a lot of concern about this, like I said, on both sides, but I would certainly like to know, have a better understanding of the consequences for these decisions. I mean, we definitely need more housing. I understand that. I support that. But I also think maintaining livability in our neighborhoods is important as well. That's all I have for now. I know we still have some more time to work through these. I'm still formulating my opinion and trying to find the point I'm comfortable with. Thank you.
Thank you. Alan and then Jennifer.
Yeah, I have 3 requests for additional information from staff for when we come back. One is an incremental changes from existing code and standards to what this proposal means in minimum code. The next one is some information around how the quarter-mile from a transit corridor for the incentives on parking in particular and half-mile from MX can be looked at more surgically and customized, and some more clarification on the Willamette Greenway issue. So on the first one, incremental changes from existing, we got a 4-page glossy, we've got lots of emails, and they keep repeating some of the misinformation and half-truths that are that we're seeing. For instance, it says there's no affordable housing requirement. Well, there is no affordable housing requirement in this particular law. We have affordable housing requirements in other places and do that in the HIP and affordable housing program. So to say that there's no affordable housing doesn't make sense. It says there's no tree protections, no Willamette Greenway protections, and no solar access protections, all of which are not true. They all have existing codes that protect trees, protect solar access, and protect the Willamette Greenway. It's a matter of they're not in this one, sure, but this doesn't do away with all those protections that already exist. 42%, 42 foot height, you know, right now we have 30 feet with a 5 foot height add to get to 37 feet. That's been code since 2008. So this is just an increment of 5 feet, as opposed to all of a sudden you can have a 42-foot house. That's not true. You could have a 37-foot house built in the backyard next to you. And then finally, you know, this is not a city proposal. It's required by state law. If we weren't told by HB 2001 to do this, we probably wouldn't be doing it. I don't like it either that we did away with R1, but that's what the legislature said we're going to do. And so we have to adopt this. The second one relates to the Willamette Greenway, and I'll need a third round, Mayor. Willamette Greenway, and the questions are, so we're juxtaposing two different requirements, one about clear and objective standards and one about the subjective goal 15 Willamette Greenway rules. And so they've got subjective and objective. And how are we going to go through that process to resolve those conflicts? And more specifically, would this then allow more development within the Greenway than otherwise? And I'll need a third round, Mayor, for my third request.
Jeff, do you want to answer about the Greenway real quick?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So I want to be very clear. Today we are talking about the Middle Housing Code amendments, which are a separate set of code amendments from the Willamette Greenway. So it's two different processes from a technical point of view. But you're right, Councilor Zelenka, that the Willamette Greenway is about reconciling with the subjective nature of the Greenway and the clear and objective requirements that we have from the state. The code amendments within the Greenway aren't allowing more uses in there. It's just providing a new set of clear and objective criteria. Right now, you can develop housing within the Greenway as long as you get a Greenway permit, and that would be true after that process as well. And so we'll, if that'll be brought to council with more information at a later date.
Yeah, thanks. That'd be helpful.
Jennifer and then Mike.
Thank you. So first of all, I just want to say I really like the chart that you created for this information. It's very clear and was easy to find what I was looking for. So I think you nailed it on this one. So I really appreciate that. I wanted to say, I think Alan's completely right. These potential code amendments are not going to solve our housing crisis. It's one tool, one thing that we're doing amongst many things that we need to do to get housing for folks who, desperately need homes to live in our community. And but we can't expect all of our problems to be solved with this one process and these one code amendments. So on that, I'm wondering, I think Emily makes a good point that people in the community seem confused and are getting different information from different sources. And some of them seem incredibly credible, but as Alan pointed out, there's inaccuracies in them. So I'm wondering do we have plans for how to get good information out into the community so people can be making, informed feedback to us? I know we've done a lot, but clearly we have a problem. So,
yeah, thank you for that. We've been watching the emails coming in and trying to provide links and several platforms for delivering information to the city. As I mentioned when I was talking about the outreach, all of our outreach has been online. So we're still in that situation and have developed a series of FAQs, the guide that you mentioned. We've held the information sessions. We've gone to organizations that have invited us there. And so those are the things that we're doing and just trying to point people to the information that has been reviewed by our legal staff and by the Planning Commission and posted on our website. I'm very open to other ideas. Another one that just occurred to me is we have started pushing out local agency information on social media, including Nextdoor. So that's a new thing for us, but a lot of people are on there. And so we want to get them the best information that we can.
Yeah, I mean, I think if staff has ideas and we can find funding for other ways to reach people, I know it's very common to do things digitally and social media and email, and that's great, but it doesn't work for everyone in our community. And, you know, some of that disconnect might be coming from those folks who just are not engaged with us on those platforms. And if we can get that information to them, I hope that we'll look into ways we can do that. I know it's a tight turnaround before we need to be making a decision, but I would definitely support getting good information out if we can. Do I have time? I have one question. Maybe someone can explain to me. I really like this last attachment A, the hot topics. But I don't think I understand exactly what you're talking about between a parent and a what is it? A child lot, and how I thought that once they're divided, they're just independent of each other, but maybe you're saying that's not true. I was just hoping someone could educate me on that.
I'm happy to take that one. So the middle housing land division, which is what you're referencing, is actually, it's a whole new type of land division that the state introduced through Senate Bill 458. And what it really is intended to do is it says, okay, once you've developed middle housing, be it a duplex, triplex, fourplex, or cottage cluster, you can essentially, that parent lot that contains the entire fourplex, for example, that remains its own independent lot that has a fourplex on it. But then for homeownership, to kind of create new homeownership opportunities, you could draw little boxes around each one of those units. And those would be the child lots, so that you could sell off one piece of a quadplex or a fourplex. And that could be a fee simple homeownership opportunity as opposed to doing a condo, which is what you traditionally have to do. And so it's a new type of a lower barrier to entry for creating independent homeownership opportunities.
Great, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate that. That is all the questions I have for now.
Thank you, Mike, and then Claire.
Thank you, Mayor. I have heard all of my colleagues ask for further information. I have heard some of them ask different things. I think Randy and Emily's request for information was a little bit different. I heard Emily say, that she was requesting that we have DLCD give us an opinion on minimum compliance. If I didn't hear that, yeah, I see Emily shaking her head. Is that something we can get, Terry?
Yeah, we can work with you on what that looks like. We've been in regular communication with DLCD throughout the process. So
how long would that probably take to get?
Well, I might need some clarification on the ask, because the minimum standards exist. They're in the administrative rules that were adopted by LCDC. Whether our proposed local code meets the minimum standards, in our opinion, it does through our review process, but that would get worked out through the process of state acknowledgement. And Lauren, please jump in if I'm mischaracterizing.
I don't want to speak for Emily here. I'm sure she has more clarification. I can see your hand up. But I'm wondering from the standpoint of us as council and the general public understanding the complete range of what the city could do to comply. Obviously, we have to comply. What we've done is say, hey, here's, with all this great work, here's an option that produces some solutions for other goals is the essence of what I'm understanding to have come from Planning Commission and the public process. I want to say more broadly, though, that I don't know the definition in Senate Bill 100 or, in statute on this, but maybe, Terry, you could help me. What's the purpose of goal 1?
Most broadly, it's to provide opportunities for low.
And my understanding is so that it's not just involvement, but it's education, it's public communication, it's making sure that we're engaging the public broadly. And I agree with you, and I want to compliment staff that what we've done in this process has been more robust and broader than, and some new innovative ideas on how to do it. And I think those are all good. But I'm feeling as though it may not have been a robust enough effort to meet this particular need. And my understanding too of goal one is when you have a public that's more better informed on a broader scale, you have less opportunity for conflict. And I think that's a good goal as a part of goal one. I think that it's hard to misinform people who are already well informed. And so if we had started with a process that if we knew a year ago, this one's going to be a heavy lift, we're going to have a lot of public education to do about the minimums, about how our goals intersect with that, about why we're going to do what we're going to do. I think we'd have less potential now for the hundreds and hundreds of emails we're getting with people concerned. So I am hoping that as we go towards the finish line here, we do more public engagement. But certainly I'm hoping, I heard we can have an analysis from DLCD, and I'm sure Emily will say more about what she's hoping that will contain. Thanks.
Thank you, Claire.
Thank you. Thank you, staff. And I really also want to really appreciate the 2 members of our Planning Commission for joining us today. That is super. So I am actually very satisfied with the recommendations of the Planning Commission. I don't think we should limit ourselves to the minimum standards. I'm not opposed to looking at some of the particulars that other counselors might want to tweak, but I am not going to support just doing the minimum or having a cookie cutter model code imposed on us. I think the alarmist nature of the information being put out by some members of the community creates the impression that should we adopt this code, whole neighborhoods will be bulldozed in the next year or 2. And that is absolutely not the case. There will be some changes on some blocks of some neighborhoods, and over time, there will be a different mix of housing in our community. My understanding from advocates who've been monitoring this process for cities across the state of Oregon, they have told me that our city's community outreach efforts have been far more robust by degrees of magnitude than any other community having to comply with House Bill 2001 in the state. So those who believe we didn't do enough aren't recognizing that we've gone above and beyond in that respect. And I would love, as Councillor Clark just conveyed, that we could create enough community awareness to avoid conflict. But unfortunately, we have members of our community who are determined to engage in conflict on this topic, regardless of how much outreach we do. And I would recommend to city staff that we direct every single person who has sent us an email on this topic, whether they like what we're doing or oppose it, to a link to our city webpage explaining this information. It's good information, clearly presented. And I also want to say that just like our Muppy program that we were just discussing prior is not a program to increase affordable housing, neither is our code a place that we can require affordability. We have other parts of our housing implementation pipeline that are addressing that. We have policies that we have put in place and looking for funding to support that. And I encourage anyone with an interest in that particular part of this topic to visit our housing implementation pipeline information on the city's website. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I have both Emily and Alan with a follow-up question, but I just wanted to insert myself in the queue here for a minute. And I want to follow up on this complaint of some in the community about this doesn't address affordable housing, and a number of you have spoken to it. And just a reminder that the encourage and incentivize components of this proposed code are intended to do just that. So people who are complaining that we're not addressing affordable code, that is the reason we are not, the Planning Commission has not recommended that we hold to the model code or the minimum code because it doesn't address affordable housing. We are trying to do that in this context. And I think that for people in particular who are, just trying to sort the wheat from the chaff and find it too much, read the attachment A that has the pie chart and summarizes those encourage and incentive is a very, very helpful summary of what are those specific pieces. And I thought Terry's presentation particularly identified that if people are concerned about affordability, that is why we would look at lot size or reduced parking requirements. So that's my first piece. I think, I am with many of you in that it's frustrating to me that having gone through a very, very long and robust process with many meetings on this topic and newspaper coverage and outreach on Facebook, that people would say, we didn't let them know this was happening. And that to some extent that is now what people are hearing is misinformation. So as counselors, I honor all of you for doing your part to really understand this information and then impart clarity, share your clarity with your constituents about where they're rising to a level of anxiety about this that I don't think there's going to be a sudden dramatic abolishing of certain neighborhoods because of this. And the final thing is I'll prompt all of you that I shared a link with you about incremental development that the city hosted a week ago and how useful it is in terms of looking at what is this development market and what are the developers who are likely going to be most interested in doing this kind of incremental housing. And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind, that it's not attractive to big commercial developments. It's not attractive to developers who want to put in big apartment buildings because it's smaller scale and the margins are much narrower. So we have an opportunity as a city to foster and nurture our local development community to build the housing that we need. And this code helps us point the way to doing that. So I just encourage you all to wrap your heads around that as you're dealing with people's, I think, deep anxiety about it. And with that, I will turn it back to Emily for a second round and then Alan.
And Sarah.
Thank you. Does Sarah want to go first? She hasn't had a first round.
I don't get a first round. I did just want to say that while you guys were talking through the different scenarios as you were going through your first round, I wanted to have Jeff at some point in this presentation clarify the height numbers, because there were a couple of numbers thrown out around 30 and 5 and 3, and I want him to clarify that so that we all leave here with the same understanding of what's happened. It doesn't have to happen right this second, but when you're ready, Mayor.
I actually think if Jeff wants to do that clarification now, would that help you, Emily, or do you want to jump in? Yeah, why don't you go ahead, Jeff?
Happy to do that. So most people are interested in the R1 low density residential zone, and that zone does, there's a proposed height increase of 5 feet. So currently the regulation is a 30-foot maximum height. And then we're proposing an addition, or the Planning Commission recommendation includes a 5-foot increase to that. When you hear the term 42 feet or 37 feet, what that's referring to is actually an existing piece of code that allows an additional 7 feet on a building when the roof has a pitch 6/12 or steeper. So essentially, if you have a steep roof, you get an extra height bonus. And that's not proposed as part of this code, it's already existing. So it's a 5-foot height increase is the difference between current code and the proposed code. So thank you for that opportunity to provide that clarification.
Thank you. Okay, Emily and then Alan.
Following up on the height thing. So what we have now only holds 2 stories, and this extra 5 feet, all of a sudden we can have 3 stories. Is that correct?
You can currently do 3 stories. However, this provides opportunity to make it more feasible to do 3 stories. It's pretty tough to have 3 stories with a 30-foot height.
So then will we make it that the first building can have the same height? Because it doesn't make sense to me that I buy a lot, the first building is this tall, and then I can put in another one that's this tall. Are we going to change it so it matches? That seems wacky to me. I am concerned about displacement. It does seem reasonable that a small old house, I love the old bungalows, would be taken down to put in a fourplex, and wood, concrete, you know, that's all in the dump now, and that's not sustainable. I'm concerned about measure 49 because, like I say, I'd rather start small and see how it goes. Because if we jump in, pedal to the metal, and it doesn't work, too bad. I think that that's important. As far as the outreach, it's great. Okay, it's wonderful that we've done more than anybody else anywhere. But if we still have part of our populace that doesn't know, it's going to be a problem later. Can we work on that now? Can we realize that not everybody is online? You know, I'm not sure, other than like the postcards we send out when we want a bond measure passed, how we connect with everybody. But this is a really, really big change. And then for what I'd like from the DLCD and the chart is my confusion that could be helped quite a bit is where are we now? What is the minimum that we have to do? What is the model code from the state? What is the suggestion from the Planning Commission? And then the suggestion that came to us just recently from Bill Northrup, I'd like to have help understanding how that fits in and contrasts with the other suggestions. And I would also like to know what DLCD thinks about that, if it could be implemented. Thank you.
Okay, I got a little lost on your question, Emily, but maybe Terry gets it. So thank you. Alan, take it away.
Yeah, on that, what I was trying to get at with the memo about the incremental change from existing code adds another column to that box, which is what is existing today. So the answer that Jeff gave about the height, you can build a 30-foot house today with a 37-foot peak. And so the increment is that 5 feet. So, so it's that, what's the increment from today? It's not all of a sudden 42 feet can be built in your backyard. That's not the case. So that the memo about the incremental change on these things from existing conditions, existing code would be very, very helpful. And then the Willamette Greenway clarification on process and how it will impact or not impact development in the Greenway would be very helpful. And then the third thing I was going to bring up was this is the quarter mile from transit, incentivizing certain things, quarter mile from transit corridors and half mile from MX. So one of the things I didn't like about HB 2001 was its cookie cutter approach to all this. And not all neighborhoods are the same and not all the impacts are the same. For instance, I think in the university neighborhood, we're going to demo old affordable housing. We're going to get more dense market rate housing and do the opposite of what we're trying to do in terms of getting more affordable housing choices. Same with the cookie cutterness of the quarter mile, half mile rule. We're just applying that blanket. I'd like to see us do a more customized approach that actually takes into consideration the on the ground circumstances and the impacts on the neighborhood, especially as it relates to parking. Half a mile from an MX where no parking is required for certain developments is a pretty big impact on neighborhoods if everybody's parking on the streets and there's more density. So, and then, you know, for example, half a mile from Franklin for the MX corridor, or half a mile from a transit corridor, like on Hilliard, into the 4 blocks into the neighborhood and Amazon neighborhood is a pretty big impact. Maybe it should only be 1 or 2 blocks. Or on 30th Avenue, which is another corridor, it's just a quarter mile below that. Well, the street right below that, you can't actually access 30th Avenue. You have to go all the way around to get there. And that's, so that doesn't even make sense that the quarter mile applies there, because you can't walk a quarter mile to get to the transit corridor. So I'd like to see us approach that's more customized, more taking into consideration the specific on the ground impacts to the neighborhoods, and having a do away with the cookie cutter approach and do it more that takes into consideration the neighborhoods and the impacts. That's it. Oh, one more thing. So also the incentivization part. The mayor brought this up. You know, what we're incentivizing is smaller housing types, lower cost housing, income qualified housing, and
Alan, you are
Point of
over time.
order, your time's up,
You're
Alan.
over time.
I can't see the clock.
Sorry. Okay, Mike and then Greg.
Thank you, Mayor. I just want to say that I heard the mayor imply to Terry that the request might not have been clear for information, and there's a lot of requests here. So I just wanted to give you the chance to ask a clarifying question of what we're needing from DLCD if you're not clear.
I think I'm clear, and we'll start that coordination with DLCD. I can reach back out if we need more clarification, but I think I've got it.
Cool. Can we get that prior to our next work session?
I hope so. It'll depend on their turnaround time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Awesome. Appreciate that. Just wanted to make sure. Thanks.
Thank you. Greg.
You know what, Mayor? I think I'll pass. My comment was more snarky than substantive, so I'll pass on this one.
Okay, thank you. And it is 1:31, and you do have another work session coming in a month and more opportunities to look into this. And so the conversation continues. And really, I want to appreciate the work that the planning commissioners have done on this, and the work Terry and Jeff, and who else I'm missing? I see Sophie there, other staff that and Lauren, who have tried to bring this home for us. So I'm looking forward to that next conversation and circling back and landing this one. So thank you all for the conversation and have a good afternoon. We are adjourned.